And I just wanted to start by saying, while we're going to be talking about very young learners, I know with the situation in the world at the moment, many of you may be teaching online at the moment. To talk about teaching very young learners online, first we have to understand a little bit about what very young learners are like and what the education for very young learners is like. So today we're not really going to talk about online teaching for very young learners. We can do that another time if you're interested. Today we're really just going to focus on what is the nature of very young learner teaching and how we can best do it. Okay. So the objectives that we're going to look at today, we're going to talk about the special nature of very young learner teaching compared to other forms of teaching students. We're going to talk about some different tips for teaching VYLs, and we're also going to try and give you some examples of hands-on activities like projects that we can do that will let you have a lot of success with your very young learners when you're teaching them. Okay, so we're going to start out with a couple of polls just to get to know you a little bit better. And so we're going to put these up on the screen in a second. But the first one is, how long have you been teaching very young learners? So let me just put this one up here. If you can vote in the poll, how long have you been teaching kindergarten age or very young learner students? Let's see what we have here today. Lots of people voting at the moment. We'll just give it a few more seconds just to get an indication of how long it's been going. Okay, great. So it seems like we've got a fairly even mix, although we've got some very experienced teachers here. I can see some people in the chat box saying 16 years, 20 years. Wow, Pal and Svetlana, right? You guys have been teaching for a long time, right? Um, there is a lot we can do if we end the poll so everybody can see. But yeah, there's a lot of things we can learn from experienced teachers. So when you have experience, if you want to contribute your experience today in the chat box, please feel free. Okay, feel free to let us know your experience and some of the things that you have done. Okay. Okay. Now let's take a look at the next question. Next question is, how comfortable are you teaching very young learners? So let me pull this one up as well. Here we go. So if you want to, how do you feel? So one is, I'm not very comfortable at all. They scare me, right? Five is, oh, this is no problem. Five is, I'm great. Okay. So most of us feel pretty comfortable, it looks like. Just give it a couple more seconds here. Okay, let's see. Right. Yeah, so just quickly, so it seems like a lot of people are pretty comfortable, right? And you may know or understand a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today if you are already experienced and comfortable. But I think it's good to share ideas, and we can always learn new tips, right? So let's see what we can learn by going through this today. Okay. Third question, how productive are your very young learner lessons? So if I pull this one up as well and drag it in, how productive are your very young learner lessons? How do you feel? Again, five is really good, right? Um, three is pretty productive. One is, yeah, we don't do much, right? Okay, great. We got a lot of different people saying different things here. A lot of people feel pretty good. That's good. Okay, lots of fours. That's good. Okay, nice. That gives us a good idea of how you feel about teaching very young learners, which is the point, right? So now that we understand that, it's great to see, like I say, a lot of experienced teachers. You feel pretty comfortable about teaching very young learners. Your lessons are pretty productive, but we can always be a little bit better, right? We can always try a little bit more. We can always do a little bit more to help our students, right? And so that's the point of always trying to develop ourselves as teachers. So let's keep with that idea in mind. Let's keep working through what we're going to talk about today. Okay, great. Okay, so the basic plan for today, we're going to talk about the main ideas of very young learner teaching. We're going to try and give you lots of ideas for the development of the students. And we'll try and show you some things, not just tell you things, but we'll try and give you some examples. When I say we're going to give you some examples, though, I have to say, unfortunately, local laws do not allow me to show you pictures or video of students I've taught before. Um, the types of things we can show you are things that are either publicly available on the internet or other places already, or maybe things from our materials. We cannot show you things from a kindergarten, for example. That's against local law. Okay. So just so you understand that, I would love to be able to show you some of those things, but we're just not allowed to do it. Okay. Okay. Someone's asked in the chat box, what does the V stand for? So VYL, very young learners, right? When we're talking about very young learners, we're talking about students age 6 or less. They're in preschool, right? Before they start grade 1. So 3 years old, 4 years old, 5 years old. So that's what we're talking about if someone doesn't. Okay, great. As I said, add your ideas to chat box. I want to know as much as we can. I'm going to read through all this later on. I will try and keep watching it as we go. I'll do my best. Okay. Now, where am I getting these images and some of this information from? These are the two websites I'm using. The CDC site that you can see at the bottom there actually references a lot of pedagogical psychology books and things like this. And it's just a good one-stop shop to get information about very young learners. That's why I'm using it. And I'd encourage you to go and look at it as well. Get some more ideas. Okay, so first thing, what's special about VYLs? What is very special about our very young learners? And I'm going to answer the question myself by saying everything, right? The very young learners are not the same as your grade 2 students or your grade 6 students or your teenagers. And the question is why? Why are they so different? And it's a very different kind of teaching. So maybe if you want to put in the chat box, I'll give you a few seconds. Why do you think I might say that this is a different kind of teaching? It's very spontaneous, says Karina, right? They have different behaviors, says Kelly. True. What else do we have? Short attention spans. Yes, even shorter than normal, Florina. That's true. What else? So active. True. So no reading and writing. Laura, good. Yeah. So these are the nature of the students. But when you think about the nature of the teaching as well, then we're not just teaching a language anymore. We're actually educating a whole child because there are so many things that they don't yet have that we educate them in when we're educating these very young learners. Okay. So for example, we're working on physical development skills with them. Okay. We're working on social-emotional development skills with them. And we're working on their cognitive skills as well as their language skills. So all of these things are still developing in these very young students, and we need to be able to teach towards those objectives or those domains, right? Okay, so what I'm going to do is very briefly go through these different domains, and then we're going to talk about how we use them in class. How can we activate these things? How can we develop our students? Okay, so for physical development, right? We are talking about the motor skills, the gross motor skills, the large muscles in your body, and the fine motor skills, like the fingers especially, right? We're also talking about coordination, right? So being able to coordinate the different parts of your body. And this leads to a lot of learning outcomes, especially in the longer term to do with writing, okay? If you cannot control your gross and fine motor skills, your writing will just not be very well developed in the physical sense, okay? And so these sorts of things are important to teach to kids as well, not just the cognitive kind of skills, but also developing their bodies. Okay. Socio-emotional development, there's a lot of things here. Kids are very egocentric when they're under 6 years old, as I'm sure many of you know, right? They have to learn to work with others, right? Not just by themselves. They need to develop that emotional control. They need to learn about the norms and consequences and social behaviors that we all have. Okay, and it links to all kinds of learning, especially peer learning. There are a lot of different things that we need to learn about the social aspects of learning and working together. Okay. Finally, cognitive and language development. This is really applying your senses, right? Your seeing, hearing, maybe not so much tasting and smelling, right? But learning how to interact with the world and taking those inputs, developing your thinking processes, especially with communication input and output. Okay. Um, and so, of course, this is going to link to all forms of learning because it's about cognition and language development, thinking process. Okay, so Alifa, sorry, I just noticed in chat, if you're having trouble with the slides, don't worry, there's a recording. You'll be able to see everything later. Okay, great. So another point with cognitive and language development is the ability to tell and comprehend stories. So I'm going to show you a short video. Hopefully this one works really quickly for us. Let me just pull this up for you. Where are we? Here we go. So let me drag this one in. Okay, so watch this little video here, see what's going on.
There's lots of things you can know about the ocean if you go down there. It has sharks when it's nighttime. And it has a fish school. It has lots of fish schools. And there's only a couple of sharks which go there, but
Okay, so I think you can see from that, you know, she's a preschooler. She's 5 years old, as you might have noticed from the top of that image or the top of that video. And the ability to do that, you cannot do that when you're 3, right? She has learned that skill up until the age of 5. Now she is able to tell these kind of stories. And this is a cognitive and language development kind of process or milestone um, for our students as they develop. So I'm going to show you a few more videos like that as we go along so we can see um, the types of outcomes we need to have. And again, sorry, I can see a few of you saying you're having trouble seeing some of these things. It's okay. You'll be able to watch the recording later and see them all again. Okay, great. Okay, so let's move on and talk about ages and stages. What do I mean by this? Some of you will already know what I mean. You noticed on that last video, she was 5 years old, and that's what she can do at the age of 5. What can kids do at different ages? Okay, now I have a little activity for you to do. So um, basically, this activity is what age can these students do these different things? Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to do this by a Padlet. Okay, so I'm going to drag this little link window in here. So if you use this Browse To button, it should take you to a Padlet, which I will also try and share with you just to show you the image. And what I want you to do, let me just share, screen share. There we go. This one. So hopefully, if you can see this Padlet screen now, Emily, if you can move it if we're having trouble, then on the screen, hopefully you can see physical, socio-emotional, cognitive and language in a Padlet window. And what I want you to do is in the comments box here, I want you to type in at what age you think they can do this. Everyone can participate if you go to this website. Okay, so use the link, go here, and then just start updating it. Okay, I can see a couple of people are already here starting to update. That's great. You can scroll down and choose anything from that list. Have a go. Try for a minute. See what you're getting. Ooh, lots of different answers coming in. That's great. We're getting tons of responses. This is fun. Right. Okay. Now this is mainly for your um, not so much entertainment, but for your learning, right? So I've actually switched mine off because I'm getting lots of notifications in the background. But if you look at that later on, if you can't do it right now, it's okay. You can try it later on. And there is actually an answers Padlet as well. So if I show you this link, this is essentially the answers that come from literature. You can load this up, try it yourself later on. Doesn't matter if you can't do it right now. I'm not going to review those answers with you. But my point is, the more you know about the learners and the more you understand what they can do, sorry, at different ages, then the better you can help your learners. Okay, and that's the point. Okay, so when you get a chance, try the Padlet or look through the answers and try and learn more about the types of learners that we're teaching. Okay, great. Now I'm going to move forward. So if you're still on the Padlet and you want to come back, hopefully you can still hear me. You want to come back to the to the main screen, that's great. And we'll keep moving forward. Okay, great. So, aiding, yeah, so actually someone just said you're on a phone and you can't see. That's okay. Try it later on or just look at the recording. That's fine. Okay. So when we understand some of these different things, what we can do is we can develop our students better by knowing the stages that they go through at different ages. Okay. So what we were doing is we're trying to follow a developmentally appropriate practice. Okay. Now this has a specific meaning in literature. And I'm not going to worry about that specific meaning too much other than to say you want to do the right things with the right ages. Okay. So we want to gently push those boundaries of what our students can do towards what they need to be able to do as they age, as they get older. And we do that with scaffolding, right? I'm sure many of you know the idea of scaffolding. I think of this in the fashion of I+1. Now, what do I mean by this? When I say I+1 here, this thing here, I'm using a digital pen, we can sometimes make the mistake of having a student who is at a level like here, and we try and teach them this much in a lesson, but they can't handle that, right? Because for them, maybe this is +10, right? So instead, what we have to do is we have to do it in a little step. And then in the next class, we have to do it in another little step, and then in another little step. And so these are +1, +1, +1, right? So if you hear me use the phrase I+1 or what's the I or what's the +1, this is what I mean. It's moving just one baby step at a time, right? They're not quite babies, but you get the idea, I think. Okay. So if you're not too sure about scaffolding or what I mean by that, we can talk about it at the end of the session in Q&A, or you can search scaffolding, and there's a lot of information about this as well. Someone, Amanullah, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name right, says I+1 comes from Stephen Krashen. He does have an I+1. I use it in a slightly different fashion, but I know exactly what you mean by Stephen Krashen. We're both basically talking about developing students in stages, okay? He's talking about something called interlanguage, which is a little different. I use it as a very general term, but you are right that Krashen does have a I+1 theory as part of his natural approach. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we've talked about some basics. I haven't gone into too much depth. I'm going to show you some more examples now. We're going to talk about tips for teaching our very young learners around these ages and stages. Okay, and all of the examples you see on the screen, we've taken a lot from the Welcome to Our World and Look and See programs, which are the very young learner programs from National Geographic Learning, because obviously we have the rights to use all of these images and content, right? We're not breaching anyone's intellectual property by showing you these things. So let's take a look at some examples. The first one I want to say, whatever you do with very young learners, safety first, right? Safety has to be your number one consideration. Why? Why does safety have to be your number one consideration? In the chat box, why? Someone says true, but why? Right? They're fragile, true. Children are fearless, true. They don't know what they're getting themselves into. They're highly unpredictable, true. Julie, parents, yes, right? If one of our children has a safety issue at school and gets hurt, then they don't have a problem, we have a problem, right? Because the parents are going to be on top of us straight away, right? So yes. So when we're thinking about safety, we could talk for an hour just about safety. We're not going to do that, but I am going to say three things. You need to think about your site, which is the physical nature of your environment. You need to think about your classroom management and how you control the students as they do things in your classroom. And you need to use a lot of routines, right? I know the experienced teachers among us here will know that routines are gold with this age group, right? If you have a routine for lining your students up, if you have a routine for collecting craft supplies, if you have a routine for starting the day, all of these things are super beneficial to running your class, okay? So if you have any routines that you want to comment on or add in the chat box, please feel free. I'm not going to dwell on these points now because we've got a lot of other things to discuss, but please feel free to share any routines you have in the chat box so other people can learn as well. Okay, Great. So we're going to move on, right, from safety, and let's get into some teaching tips, okay? And I'm going to break these down into the three domains. I'm going to start with socio-emotional, and I always feel for this one, it's about building that classroom as a community, okay? And for that, we're going to start out by talking about a couple of things which kind of relate to classroom management, really. And I would say at any age, you want to have rules and consequences for your students, right? They need to know what's the rule, what happens if I do it, what happens if I don't, right? And make sure that they are following the expectations and rules you put on, okay? Now, again, my advice, and maybe some of you can comment on this, is I always tell kids what they can do, not what they can't do. Now, I'll give you an example as to why, right? I have seen this happen. I'm going to use my hands because I can't show you another way with a person. Here's the classroom. Here's a kid. He's running in the class, right? He's running through the classroom. A teacher said to him, "Don't run." And this is what the kid did. He's running. He hears "don't run." He stops. He thinks about it. And then he starts to hop at high speed across the classroom, right? Now, is that what the teacher wants? No, of course not. They don't want a student hopping at high speed. That's as dangerous as running, right? So instead, what should the teacher say? Does anyone have a suggestion in the chat box? What should the teacher say instead of "don't run"? What should they say? Maybe sit down. Yes, in class we walk. I like that one. Let's walk. Maybe we want them to move, so they please try to walk. Yeah, walk nicely, walk cautiously. Lots of things, right? Great. So these are the sorts of, I would call them positive or can do kind of rules that we should use with our students, right? And then once we've instituted those things, I would always give praise and rewards to my students for doing the things that I want, right? Give the high five, give the sticker, give the verbal praise, whatever it may be, okay? So lots of those things. Yeah, I can see tons and tons of comments in the chat box. That's really great to have lots of people suggesting their ideas. Great job, okay? But yeah, use rules, use consequences, reward what you want. I usually find when I'm teaching that is the key, to my success teaching these kind of kids, right? Okay. That said, sometimes when we have rules, and maybe one of our rules is play nicely or things like this, sometimes students will start negotiating, right? They might have a situation that looks something like this going on in class. Now, for me, I usually pause a second before I get involved in this. Obviously, there's a bit of tension here. There may be going to be tears if I don't step in at some stage. But what I would usually do is I will wait and let them negotiate first, especially if they're doing it in the language you want them to use. So if I'm teaching English and they're negotiating in English, then I'm going to let them go for a few seconds before I step in, right? Because that way, they're getting practice at learning the skill of negotiating, right? And resolving differences, okay? So yeah, be ready to step in for safety, but sometimes you want to let them go a little bit as well, okay? Another one here, when the kids get a little older, maybe 4 years old, usually you want to start giving choices, okay? But when I give choices, I don't make no one of the choices, right? Now, what do I mean by that? Give you an example. So if I say to a student, I don't ask them, do you want to paint? Never ask that question to my very young learners. Do you want to paint? Because they could say no, right? And then I'm stuck, right? So instead what I do is I say, do you want to paint a flower or a rainbow? Okay, the painting is not open to negotiation here, right? It's flower or rainbow. Which one do you want to paint? Okay, and they're getting the choice, right? But they do need to paint, right? Now, if they get smart, right, and they start to come back at me a little bit, and they say, "But teacher, we don't want to paint," right, or something like this, then I have a little trick up my sleeve. This is what I have this belt, which says it's a brand name on it. It says Boss. And so if they start to say we don't want to paint, well, I'm like, well, who's the boss? And I point to my belt, right? And I'm just like, who's the boss, right? And then they're like, oh, okay, right. And this is the relationship or the little joke I have with my students to kind of diffuse the tension or get them to follow along with what I want, right? So I don't know if you want to make yourself a label or something like that as well, but I'm just lucky I have this belt, I guess, right? But it's a bit of fun, right? Okay, I'm just watching the chat box and seeing some of the comments. It's always fun to see. Yeah. Anyway, another one, when kids get, again, at this kind of age, 4 years old, you can start using a lot of helpers in your classroom. And this is great for building that class community and taking turns and things like this, right? So we want to give the students options to take jobs, basically, right? So to give you a lot of examples here, a book helper to pass out the books, a storybook holder during story time, they get to hold the book or they get to turn the page, right? Um, the board boss, right? The person who can move the magnets on the board, or maybe they can write on the board for you. The paper supplier to give things out. The gopher, can you please go for, right? Go for pencils, go for crayons, go for glue, right? Um, the class captain, maybe they're the one to make everybody line up, right? So maybe you have a routine where it's like, okay, everyone, one, attention, one, two, yes, sir, right? Or something, and everybody's lining up with a routine and they can lead the routine, right? Or maybe the quiz master, the person who runs the quiz at the end of class, like, for example, oh, what color is it? Oh, it's black. Good job. Okay. And then you can go. So you can use these different roles and responsibilities in your class, give them to the students, rotate them amongst your students, and they learn that they can take part in this bigger kind of community. Again, we could talk a lot about these kind of things. I know some of you may have a lot of good ideas or other roles. Again, add them to the chat box if you can, so that other people can learn from those things as well. Okay, good one. I'm just looking to see if there's any quick comments. Good job. Yes, yeah, Leslie, yeah, your students do love to help you, right? Um, they want to be big. They want to help. So give them that opportunity and they will take it and they will run with it, right? I've sometimes given my problem students, the ones who are a bit disruptive, given them the responsibility, and often it settles them down, right? Because now they have a job, they have something to do, and that can be really useful for managing some of those tricky students. Cool. Good job. Okay, let's move on. Still on socio-emotional. When we get to 5 years old, this is when kids often start trying these words that we don't really want them to use, right? I put poo-poo here. I've been in Asia for like 15 years, and poo-poo seems to be the word that kids start bringing up, right? So again, going back to my first point, I try and ignore this, and I try and reward kids who are speaking nicely. But I'm just kind of curious, what other things do your students say or do in class that you don't really want them to do, especially when they get to about this age? Can you, in the chat box, what things have you seen or heard? Give me another example. I sometimes have kids want to take off their clothes in class, like down to their underwear. So you have to be careful about, you can't really ignore it, but how do you deal with it, right? Um, yeah, some of them might say yes, WTF or something. Yes. Some are bullies. Yes, bullying is something that you have to kind of deal with, right? And that is a socio-emotional challenge to deal with. So again, how do we deal with that, right? We won't go into that right now because we could again discuss that for a long time. But these ideas that you're putting in the chat box can become future webinars as well. We can discuss in more detail. Okay. Um, I want to kill you, miss. Oh dear, Nilafar. Oh, hopefully we don't really want that to happen, right? Um, uh, yeah, pushing and hitting. Yeah, of course, right? Not sharing. Yeah. So a lot of these sorts of things that you're putting in there are, yeah, we don't want them. Again, if possible, if it's not disrupting class, I try and ignore it. I just try not to give it attention, because sometimes if I give it attention, it will breed it. It will make it happen more, right? So I try and extinguish it by ignoring it, and then I try and reward other behavior that's what I want. Okay. We could get into a whole discussion about behaviorism and reward techniques, but we won't do that right now. But I know some of you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, great. Okay, so good. Okay, I'm just looking at the chat box. Seems okay. Right, so we're going to move on now from socio-emotional, where we've got about 25 minutes left. Let's take a look at cognitive tips. Okay, so cognitive tips are things to do with building the thinking skills and the thinking processes, right? And this plays into language as well. But I want to give you an example of a 3-year-old and the kind of cognitive process they can handle. So I'm going to do that with another video. Let me throw this one up here now. Oh, sorry. I'm having trouble with the menus. Here we go. So this little boy is 3. And let's see how he follows a 2 or 3
Pour your
step
goldfish
instruction.
on the plate and then drink some juice.
Jimmy, take a big bite.
Okay, so we could see there, if you were able to see the video, sorry if you couldn't, that he can successfully complete that process, right? And he's got the memory capacity and the understanding to finish one task and then continue with the next one, right? Again, Henry, sorry, if you didn't see it, you'll be able to watch it in the recording at least, okay? So my apologies that sometimes these don't play on, especially on mobile devices, they don't play well sometimes. But the point here is he's able to follow a 2 or 3 step process. Now, can we give him 5 steps? No, right? Can we only give 1? Well, yes, but we can challenge his brain a little bit more and develop his thinking process by giving him a 2-step process or maybe a 3-step process. So this is about developing your students, right? So if we look at an example here, so maybe we're doing a project. Okay, and this is a project example from Look and See Level 1, which is designed for 3-year-old students. You can see here in this there are 4 steps in this process, right? So using my digital pen here, we've got 1 step up here, goes across to step 2, step 3, step 4, right? Oops, excuse me. Step 3, step 4, right? Now, if I'm actually doing that, I'm grabbing a piece of paper here, then you need to think about the steps you go through when you're doing that. So I might have a piece of paper, right? And I maybe need to physically show my students how this works, right? So it's like step 1, close the paper. Step 2, crease, right? And then step 3, open. Okay. Now, if I'm doing this process with my students, then I follow this basic process. What I do is teacher says, teacher does. So I do, okay, everyone, you have a piece of paper. Fold, crease, fold, right? Unfold, right? Then what I do is step 2 is students say, teacher does. Okay, students, what do I do first? Okay, so first I fold. Good. What do I do next? Oh, I crease. Good. Okay, now what do I do? Oh, okay, I unfold, right? So again, I'm doing, but they're telling me what happens, right? Now, step 3 is now they get the piece of paper and then we all talk about it and we do it together, okay? And in this way, I can develop that thinking process and I can develop the understanding of steps in my students, okay? So do get very physical, even in an online setting like this. I can use these kind of physical models to show my students what I want to do, right? So if I was doing this particular activity, when I was doing, say, this part here, that one I've just X'd, that's maybe a 3-step process I show my students, and then we finish that one. Now we go on to this one here, right? And maybe there's 3 steps here. Okay, use blue paint, put it on the paper. Okay, everybody done? Good job. Okay, now use red paint, put it on the paper. Okay, and you just need to break it down into short steps like this for the students to do. Okay, so something definitely worth thinking about. And yeah, using TPR or physical actions, as Mohammed just mentioned, is a good way to show your students what you want. Okay, great. Okay, so moving along here. The other thing is with younger students of this age, for their cognitive process, we want to read every day and we want to point out pictures in books or stories, and we want them, or flashcards also works, and we want them to name and repeat words. Okay, so if I was using this, I might be like, oh, what's this? If you want to type in the chat box as I'm going, that's fine. What's this? Oh, it's a girl. Good job, right? Okay, what about what's this? Right? Oh, it's a doll. Good one. Okay, now maybe in the next picture, I switch the task a little and I just say, okay, where is the girl? Where is the girl? And my students are like, oh, there she is. Yay, good job, right? Oh, where's the boy? Where's the boy? Oh, here's the boy. Good job, right? So in one part, I'm prompting what the word is. And in the second one, maybe I'm giving the word and they have to go for the image, right? So I'm creating these links. Um, and then we can take that off the book and we could say, okay, in the classroom, where's the boys? Where are the boys in the classroom? Where are the girls? Where are the dolls? Okay. And these sorts of linking tasks, linking words and images, linking a picture in a book to a real object. These are developing the thinking skills for our students. Okay, so an important stage when you're about 3 years old. Okay, um, you can do this with vocabulary as well. Like in this particular lesson, again, this is a 3-year-old lesson from Look and See. We're talking about food, and so maybe we do this in the lesson, and then after this, every time we have snack or we have lunch, if that's part of your kindergarten or very young learner class day, then I'm going to be referring and asking them about, oh, what's this? What's that? Where's the milk, right? So that these students are getting reinforcement on these things as well. Okay. Also, even with your ABC poster, here's an ABC poster that goes with Look and See. I'll talk a little bit more about why it looks like this a little later, but in here that you can see all of these animals in the poster. We can talk about those animals as part of class as well, and there's probably a unit in your material about animals, right? So we can keep referring to these things as we go, right? So yeah, so Betty Lou's just saying, like, in this one, who swims? Now you're getting actually into a higher order thinking skill. That's going into a whole other topic, which might be something for 4 years old or 5 years old, because maybe when kids are 3, they don't quite know yet, right? But it's great to be able to develop that kind of thinking skill in your students. Yes, maybe at 3 it might be a bit much, but as they get to 4 and 5, yeah, they should be able to do that. One thing actually, just while you're making these kind of critical thinking kind of questions in the chat box, one comment I'll make on that, off topic a little, is whenever you're asking a student a question that involves some sort of critical thinking, first, what you should think of is, could they answer that question in their first language? Because usually we're teaching them English as a second language, right? Could they answer that question in their first language? And if they can't, then of course, there's not much point asking them in their second language English, right? But that's a good check of, is this an appropriate question? Can they even answer it in their first language? Right? So just have a think about that when you're thinking of those kind of questions. Okay. Great. Okay. Good one. Okay. Moving forward. Playing matching games and comparing and contrasting. Again, these are great skills to develop in our 3-year-olds and as they move forward. Here's a couple of book examples. So obviously here, we're matching the object to its shadow. So we've got a cookie. Okay, obviously that's going to match over here. The banana is going to match over here, and so on, right? Here's a similar task in the activity book. So this one is focused on shapes. So obviously the square goes with the square, and I'm probably going to trace the square as part of this, right? And then which object is the square? It's this one, right? So these sorts of activities, and this is in Welcome to Our World. Yeah, Rosina, it is. Yeah, these are the kinds of thinking activities that help our students, right? To do matching and comparing and talking about shapes and things like this as well. Okay. Right. As the kids start to get a little bit older, or they start to move through, like 3 years old, there's other thinking skills we need to start developing. And this is one. So here you can see it's a little bit small, but we've got tall and short, right? And then you have this activity. What do you think happens in this one? Why is this activity here? This is, this is a sticker activity. They put a sticker in the spaces. Sequencing, yep. The other one is, yeah, patterns and rhythm. Perfect, right? So you guys have got all the answers, right? So, yeah, tall, short. What's next? Tall, that's right, okay? So the kids learn about patterns or rhythm or sequencing from doing these kinds of activities, and that is a thinking skill, right? A cognitive skill to develop. Okay, great. Another one is looking and recognizing emotions. I'm still on 3 years old at the moment, right? So, for example, okay, the boy. Okay, how does he feel? How does he feel? Now, again, maybe you have to give the options. Is he happy or sad? Right? Is she happy or sad, right? Okay. What about the girl? Is she happy or sad, right? It's a bit hard to see the doll, perhaps, but like, is the doll, excited or upset? I don't know if you're using those vocabulary words, for example, right? Um, and then so we can talk about emotions, and if we're recognizing emotions in books, then maybe we can also recognize them in people later on and talk about why. Okay. Um, so in this one, for example, why are the boy and the girl sad? Ah, because they don't like dolls, right? How does the doll feel, right? what what is the doll thinking at the moment? Are they happy or sad? Why? Because they're not being played with, right? So these kinds of thinking tasks, it's cognitive because we're recognizing it, but it's also playing into socio-emotional as well. Okay, moving right along. Now we're starting to finally move to a little bit older. 4 years old, let students be leaders and copy what they do. I mentioned about having a class captain, maybe for some of the activities. You can do a lot of different things where students lead and others follow. And it's the copying skill that we're really looking at there. Give you an example. Sorry, I don't have a picture of this because, again, it's from some of my old classes, and I can't show you that picture for legal reasons, right? Because of local law. But doing something like, okay, everybody line up like elephants, and you use your trunk to grab the person in front of you, right? And then we're walking to the bathroom like this, for example, right? And I let my kids come up with these kind of ways of doing it. Okay, everybody, we're off to the bathroom like monkeys today. Okay, go, monkeys, right? And the kids are copying each other as they do this. Someone leads, the rest copy. And these are fun things. Kids like to do them, right? But it's also developing cognitive skills and other skills as they do it, right? Okay, moving along. Another thing we can do with kids at this kind of age that is a cognitive skill, it goes with sequencing, is what happens next. So making predictions in a story, right? Let me show you a quick video. We're starting to run out a little time, but we'll do our best here. Let me show you, where are we? Here we go. Here's the video. Let's get this one right. I'll just make it a little bigger here for you, hopefully. Bigger, bigger. Okay, here we go.
Uh-oh. So you got Miss Susie in her tree, and you've got these bad squirrels that are fighting at the bottom. What do you think's going to happen?
They're going to nibble on a tree and it's going to fall over.
Think they're going to nibble on the tree till it falls over? Does that sound like what might happen?
Susie's going to fall and she's going to hurt herself.
Oh, no.
Okay, so you can see these kids have mastered that kind of skill of being able to predict or make a prediction, at least, whether or not it's correct, right? But at least think ahead, right? And make some sort of prediction about what's going on. Again, sorry if the videos aren't working so well for you. Watch them in the recording; they'll work fine there for you. Okay. Someone made a comment about will we be able to do these things after COVID-19? We'll talk about that at the end, right? Talk a little bit more about that then. Okay. Also, as well as prediction, we can also do things like pre-read stories. I'm going to flick through from this big book from Welcome to Our World. This I Like Dolls. Now, I've removed all the text, but this is what I would do with my students and say, can you tell me what the story is about or what's happening? So I'll do it just like, I'll show you what I show my kids. So it would be like, okay, here's the first picture. Here's the second one. Here's the third one. And number 4. And finally, number 5. And that's the end of the story, right? And so then when we look at that, maybe I close the book and I say, okay, so what do you think this story is about, right? And they will probably tell me what happens or what they think happens. But then maybe I say, okay, so in the big idea, in the big picture, right? What can we say about this? And again, this is something that you have to model and show your kids. But at the end of the day, the students maybe get the idea of, oh, okay, by quickly looking, we can have an idea. Okay, now we can go away and we can look at the story more. And this comes into later on when your kids go to primary school, elementary school, and they're having to do pre-reading tasks or they have to do skimming, right? We're kind of doing that in a comic strip, right? So these kinds of under maybe looking at different meanings or what information can we get out of this, kind of useful skills to start developing. But again, this is like for 5 years old. 3-year-olds can't do this, right? They're not really there. Okay, good one. Yeah, so like Victor's saying, we could use this activity to introduce vocab, um, talk about different types of meaning, tons of things we can do. Okay. Okay, physical tips. Let's get through a few of these. Yeah, here, so we're really talking about motor skills. So in the beginning, the students have very limited skills. Maybe they can try to hold a pen or a pencil with what we would call a tripod grip, this kind of grip, but they're not going to be very good at it. They're probably more likely to do this, right? So, but in the beginning, we want them to start working on very simple tasks. So drawing straight lines, right? So here's an example from one of our books for 3-year-olds is like, just draw a line, right? All you have to do is try and take the pencil and try to do this. And I'm about as good as my students, right? But then as we move through the material, we start developing more difficult physical abilities. Okay, follow the curves, follow the zigzags, do curves in different shapes, do letter approximations. So these sorts of things are what we develop as we go along. Okay, so it's on the path to developing writing skills down the track, right? Now, with this one as well, you don't necessarily just have to do it on paper. I like to do it as well with materials that are textured. So here, for example, I have a plate of salt. And then in that plate of salt, I can trace stuff, right? Now here I'm using letters, but okay, you can do lines or circles or whatever you like, right? And kids love the tactile nature of this, right? You can use a lot of different materials, but if you want to do something like what I've shown you here, I suggest salt, not flour, sugar, or sand, right? Flour and sugar, you get them wet and they're disgusting, right? Sand you can get sand from a lot of places, but it might not be clean. It might be dirty. The thing about salt is if you get it wet, doesn't matter, it'll dry out. If kids try and put it in their mouth, they'll soon learn not to put it in their mouth, and it's not going to hurt them. It's not toxic. And you don't really get bugs in salt. Salt kind of kills a lot of bugs. But in that sense, like using salt is a good medium for this kind of thing. Okay. Yeah, and salt, like someone says there, it's not sticky, right? Yeah, salt is not sticky. You don't have to worry about that so much, right? So just an idea, right? Sand, if you get it from an aquarium, like a fish shop, an aquarium shop, might be suitable. You can use small stones. You can use lots of things, right? Yeah. When you get a little older, 4 years old, that's when you start tracing letters, right? So this is a very typical activity book page. We need to, trace the letters J or Y in the book, right? And I also do this with posters, right? Now you've seen this poster before. Just to mention, where did this poster come from? Emily will probably send out some follow-up information about this later, but the poster is created in association with a National Geographic photographer called Joel Sartori, who has a project called PhotoArk, and he's trying to raise awareness about especially endangered animals, but he's photographing as much as he can, every species on the planet, right? If you don't know about Joel and the work he's doing at the PhotoArk, go and check it out later. But this is the kind of poster, ABC kind of poster that you often have. And some teachers, when they put this in their classroom, here's a classroom. Now, this is a stock image. I'm allowed to show you this one. Where in this classroom do you see the ABCs? Where are they? In the chat box, where do you see these things? Right up there, correct, right? They are up here. Now, my problem with that is that they're not accessible to the students, right? You cannot touch them, right? What I would do if it was my classroom, so here is a classroom, right? And it's ready for me to do my thing. What I would do is I would take my poster and I would put it on the wall like that at about chest height for the students, right? And then when they finished an activity, or when they've got a little free time, I will say, okay, go to A. Okay, everybody, let's start A, right? And then down the wall, they're tracing, right, as they go down. And they get this practice of tracing on the poster. And you can start a kid at A, and when they get a couple of letters down, the next kid starts, and so on, right? And this kind of idea, putting this in your classroom as a strip along the wall from A to Z, and they can just go down and do it when they've got some free time is a good way to start building up that tracing skill. Okay, great. Let's move on. We're starting to run out of time. Copying practice skills, building these pre-literacy skills when they get to 5 years old, copying shapes, copying letters, doing things like that. And eventually we get to the stage where students can start actually writing, right? Again, I'll show you a quick video. I'm actually just going to jump to the end of this one. So I'm going to load this one up. I'll play it, but I'm going to jump to the end. Let's get it going. There we go. So this little girl is tracing, or sorry, she's writing. I'm just going to jump to the end. So if this plays for you, there we go. Okay, so what do you notice is going on as she's writing here? Do you notice anything in particular? The 7, true. Yep. Yep, so some of these things, she's writing the big letters, but then she wrote a small letter, didn't she? Okay. But also the 7, that's what we call a letter reversal, right? Is that a problem? To answer my own question, for her age, not really. No, kids will do letter reversals. Almost every kid will, at some stage, get their letters backwards. That's not really a problem as long as they're not still doing it when they're grade 2, right? Even in grade 1, sometimes kids are doing letter reversals, and that's not too bad. If you worry that your kids are doing letter reversals and they shouldn't be, then talk with some experienced teachers, maybe talk to some other people, see what they think. But up to about grade 2, it's not a big issue. The kids will self-correct with more exposure. Okay. So some people are making some comments about that. As Mabel says, sometimes this can lead to dyslexia, but it is not an indicator of dyslexia if the kid is only 5 years old. It is just a developmental stage. So do not worry. Okay. If they're doing it when they're grade 3, then maybe it's a different story, right? So don't be psychologists. We're not clinical psychologists, right? I had a trainer who was once, but I'm not. But I know when I shouldn't comment on certain things, right? So this is an example. It's not really a problem. If you feel it might be, talk to an expert, right? Okay, cool. Okay, next one, sorry, close this one, get rid of that. Other things we can do, play outside games, do obstacle courses, do these physical kind of activities. Even indoors, you can do obstacle courses, jumping games, things like this, right? To develop physical abilities, right? Working with toys and things that construct. Now, if you look at all of the toys that are shown in these images on the page here, which one do you think most matches with the comment I'm making at the top of the slide? Work with toys that encourage construction and building things. The blocks, correct. Good job, Mabel. So yeah, the blocks down here, maybe some of you use things like Lego or other construction blocks or things like that. These are great things to give to 5-year-olds because it's a finer degree of control and it's a motor skill they need to develop. Okay, great. Okay, good job. So let's move on. Now we are, just so you know, we were supposed to be finished in about 4 minutes. I'm going to run over. Okay, I'm sorry. But I hope you'll stick with me a little bit longer. If you don't have time and you do need to go, I've got 4 slides and a couple of videos to show you, basically. But if you don't have time, just remember this is a recording as well. You can watch it later, okay? But maybe another 10 minutes, okay, max, okay? So let's take a look at projects, okay? To aid development with projects, the great thing about projects is they develop many of these areas in our students at the same time, okay? So if you look at this activity, these kids on this outdoor gymnasium, is this just a physical development activity? And I'm going to say no. What else could it be? What do you think? Do you have any ideas in the chat box of what else we could do with this kind of activity, in this kind of setting, excuse me? How do we make it a social act? Yeah, they collaborate. Great. Valentina said, collaboration, right? There could be colors and shapes involved in, Rosina says. Yep. Balance skills. Yeah, that's a physical skill. Good one. Accounting. Yeah, I like that one, Sahir. Yeah. So we can have a lot of different things. Maybe your objective is to go around this course and your feet can only touch things that are blue, for example. Now I've added a cognitive element to this obstacle course, right? Maybe there is some social exchange that has to go on. There's some communication before you can go to the next piece that you have to do. So these are all things, yeah, like role playing, like Ariana says. There's a lot of different things you can add into this to make this could be a project, okay, to complete a task like this, right? So lots of things we can do. Now, the other question that I used to have to address a lot, and in the beginning, I'll tell you what I used to say. The question I would get asked is process and product, which is more important? Okay. For the sake of time, I'm not going to ask you. I'm just going to say some teachers will say the process, some teachers will say the product, some teachers are saying both, right? If we look at this example, for example, does it matter the process of making it, or does it more matter that step 4 looks pretty at the end, right? And my answer to that one would be, it depends on who you ask. Because if you ask the teacher, most teachers just by themselves will probably say the process, right? But you ask the parents or the manager of your school, and they may say product, okay? Because they have different objectives. They want things to look good because there's some sort of peer status or competitive advantage in having a good looking product, right? So what I'm going to talk about in the next couple of ideas is just basically ways you do both, right? How can you do both in a couple of examples, right? You have to think about it a little, right? So let's take a look at a couple of examples. And as I do this, I want you to think about how hard some of these things might be for your learners, right? Good example, when you're doing a craft, to figure out how hard it might be is to try doing it with your other hand, right? Like I am right-handed, but what if I try and do things with my left hand? How does that work? Okay. You can't, if you do it with your other hand, my left hand in my case, I can't really expect my kids to do better than me, right? Because I'm an adult and I can control things pretty well, but even my left hand is not very good, right? So if you can think about that, if I do it with this hand, how do I make this as easy as possible for me so that I can then give it to them and make it as easy as possible for them, right? So, for example, scissors. What age can kids use scissors effectively, right? What age can they do that? The answer is about 4 years old. Before about 4, they have trouble. But even at 4 years old, the only thing she is doing in the photo at the moment is just cutting a straight line like that. That's all she's doing. She's not doing anything else. If some of you are saying 5 or 6, that's because they're maybe cutting shapes and curves, right? And that would be like a 5-year-old skill, okay? So depends on the scissors. If they're safety scissors, we can get 4-year-olds to have a go. But let's have a think about if you're doing a 3-year-old craft like this one from Welcome to Our World, how do you do this one with no scissors? And the answer is you rip or you tear, right? So you can see in picture number 3 here, the Freddy here, he's tearing, right, rather than using scissors to accomplish the craft. Here's another example, right, for making this pencil box is, again, the tearing idea, right? You can see that the paper there has been torn to make that. Now, I'm going to show you a little video, and this is me doing a couple of these craft ideas, right? I'm not doing a whole craft in this one, but I want to give you an idea of how paper tearing works for kids a little bit, right? If you're not quite sure. So let's, oops, sorry, that may be too tall. Shrink it. Okay, let's take a quick look. So here's a piece of paper. I'm tearing. Have a purpose. Okay, now, what do you notice about those 2 tears that I made? I tore them in different directions on the paper, and you might notice that one is a little bit uneven where the other is more even, right? And that's one thing to know about the type of paper you use, is that sometimes it tears very unevenly in one direction. You want to take account of that when you're doing your craft, right? So if I just move this video forward, I'm going to jump ahead. So what I did here, let me see, I think I'll go back a little bit. Here we go. So what I did is I took a strip and I cut it so that the way I'm going to tear it is going to be easy. Now, this is me doing the craft, right? Here we go. So grab a red pen, I'm coloring. Now, you notice I'm using my left hand in the video because that's my bad hand. So this is me being a kid. Here we go. Okay. Just pausing there, you can see I almost hit the table. I had to be careful, right? Almost colored the table in. But now when I want to tear this, it's going to be quite easy to tear, right? I'm not really going to probably make many mistakes when I do this, right? Now, if I jump ahead, we'll look at this one. Here's me doing the same thing. But now I'm using a whole sheet of paper, right? Like you might see kids do, and I'm coloring away, making my apples for my apple tree. And now when I want to tear it, what happens? I wasn't doing this on purpose, but you can see, maybe I feel bad because I made a bit of a boo-boo. And now I have to kind of clean that piece up, right? And away I go finishing to tear this off, right? So the question is, like, now let me just organize these. Here we go, and here we go. The question is here, when you're doing this craft, sometimes you might want your things to look like the top tiers, or you might want them to be the bottom ones. You might want to teach the kids about taking care, about being frustrated. That might be part of your project outcome. So it's important to have just some of these ideas in mind when you're thinking about this kind of craft, okay? Cool. Let me close this one. Let's quickly go through another example. Let's take a look at another one. Here's a 4-year-old one using scissors. So the craft is to make this kind of seesaw shape. And to do that, you can obviously see there is a rectangle and a triangle that has been cut. Okay. Now, what I would suggest whenever you do this, in the diagram, you can see step 1 is color, but it's already been cut. Okay. Problem here, maybe the kids will end up coloring over the edge and onto the table. If we color, then maybe the coloring doesn't look quite nice. Maybe the edges aren't filled in, whatever. How can we try and do this a slightly different way that might give us a good process and a good product at the same time? So let's have a look at how I tried to do this one. Where are we? Seesaw, here we go. Okay, so what I tried to do here, here's me. Now you notice I've got a template that I have put the shapes on, but I haven't cut it yet. And what I do is I color first. And again, I'm coloring left-handed. And I'm actually trying to color inside the lines. I seriously am, right? And so I color. Now I'm just going to advance through. Let me get like halfway through here. I don't want to watch me coloring for 30 seconds. So I finished my coloring, but now what I'm doing is I'm cutting. Again, I'm cutting left-handed, so I'm being careful. But whereas my shapes may have looked ugly before, once I have finished cutting them, then you can see that actually the final product probably doesn't look too bad once I'm done, right? Let's get the bottom off this. I missed the paper, you notice? Anyway, there we go, right? And now that looks a lot prettier, right? And I didn't get crayon all over the table, right? And so, yeah, so I finished coloring and cutting this thing. Actually, what I'm going to do is I finished doing it, right? I've actually still got them. Where are they? Here we are. I still actually have them here. This is what I made, right? But I colored first and cut second, and I'm cutting only in straight lines, so my students can do that, right? Okay, very good. Okay, next one, last one. So working with things that involve different motor skills, especially when the kids get older, using their fingers a lot more, things like this, right? Again, for this one, step 2, and this one is folding. I'm just going to really quickly show you how I would teach my kids to fold like that. Again, I've got a little video here. I'm doing this left-handed again. Here's my piece of paper. So I teach them like fold over, right? And then crease, okay? And then turn, and then fold, and then crease. And now that we've got a rhythm, right? Show them what it needs to look like. Okay, turn, fold, crease. Turn, fold, crease. And we can talk about this while we're doing it, right? And eventually we get, if I just stop the video, hide the video, eventually we get the shape that we want, and it looks quite nice because we haven't just gone, brrr. We haven't tried to do it too quickly. We've got a process for making it happen. Okay, cool. So hopefully you can use a few of these ideas when you're doing these kind of project physical tasks, right? Here's another one, an abacus, right? How would you do that one? Like threading the beads onto these pipe cleaners to make this abacus, right? For this 5-year-old craft, right? So think about how would you teach the kids to do that? Okay, is it one at a time, or are you just going to say, here's 5 green ones, go. Here's 5 blue ones, go. Right? How will you do that? So just thinking about these things. Sorry, I've got the hiccups. Okay. Um, okay, so we're starting to wrap up. Thank you for sticking with me this long because I know we've run over time a little bit. A couple of final points is to account for tiredness. Your very young learners will get tired very easily. So switch activities. Don't do anything for too long. Do things like shake it out or brain gym with your kids. A shake it out is just like, okay, everyone shake it out. Okay, flex your hands, things like this, right? Shake out the tiredness, right? And get the kids loose and ready for the next part. Brain gym is some just different activities that make you think. I can do one. It's a bit hard with the headset. I'm going to show you. Try this one yourself. It's kind of funny. Take one hand, doesn't matter which hand, put it on your nose. Okay, now take the other hand and put it on the opposite ear, like that, right? Now, the brain gym part is when I say change, I want you to swap. Right? Ready? 1, 2, 3, change. As fast as you can. 1, 2, 3, change. 1, 2, 3, change. 1, 2, 3, change. Change. Right? Do you still have a nose? Right? So some of these things you can try and teach your kids to do, and it helps them with thinking and coordination and a lot of these sorts of things. It's a lot of fun. Other things are like, finger plays like Incy Wincy Spider went up the water spout, right? You can do these sorts of things. There's a ton of different things to do with kids to help them loosen up or work on these kind of motor skills, okay? But also think about what your kids can do, watch what they can do, and then use those things in your class. And remember, push them a little bit more. Get them to do something a little more difficult to keep moving them forward. Okay? Great. So to wrap up, what's special about VYLs? Everything, right? Okay, it's a very different type of teaching. Educate the physical, socio-emotional, cognitive language parts. We've got to do all of that. Now, the great thing about learning all of these things is that the more you learn, the more you become a VYL expert, right? The more you can do a lot of these things and you know what's going on beyond the language. And the people who need the help with this the most sometimes are their parents, right? If you, as a VYL teacher, can help parents understand their students and what they can do more, then you're helping the parent, and that's going to lead to business for your school or whatever other objectives are going on, right? So really important to make sure you learn as much as you can to help your kids as much as you can and educate the parents. Right? Okay, so that's been a ton of information. I'm sorry I ran like 10 minutes over, but I hope that was really useful. I know Emily's going to come on in a moment, but if you do have some questions you want to answer, then feel free. We have some time to do a little Q&A if you want, but I'll pass it back to Emily for a second. Emily.
Thanks so much, Andrew, and thanks for that great session. And thank you everyone for staying on with us. There's some wonderful feedback in the chat box. So we really appreciate you all spending some time with us today. And I know I learned something new in this. So a lot of things. That coordination was tough for me, do you have to say? I'll practice that. A few notes as we wrap up now. We will be sending you a recording of this session. We'll also be sending you the slides and certificate for joining us here today. And one more note, that ABC chart that Andrew showed, that was from Look and See, which is the new 3-level series for very young learners of English by National Geographic Learning. We're actually going to be giving away a free copy of the ABC chart featuring the photo arc by Joel Sartori. We'll be sending a little bit more information along to you, but we'll be sending you a link to download your copy of that so you can print it out and use it with your very young learners. So we're really excited to be giving that away to you. But more on that soon. We'll send it in the follow-up email to all of you. I'm going to put in a link in the chat box now to find out a little bit more about Look and See if you are interested in learning more. It's a brand new series. A lot of the examples that Andrew used today were from Look and See, and Welcome to Our World too, which is another National Geographic Learning series for very young learners of English. And just one other thing, we know with everything going on right now, teachers are looking for resources for online teaching, and we invite you to visit our online professional development resource page to support you as you transition to teaching virtually. We'll be continuing to add more webinars to help you with this, as well as blog posts and other helpful resources. And I'm going to put the link in here. We actually have for young learners and teens a few lesson plans in there and teacher resources too that we recently just added. So be sure to check it out if you have some time. Great. And last but not least, we're going to send you onto a feedback survey now. We'd love to hear what you thought of this session so we can keep bringing you helpful webinars in the future. And Raven, you'll get the certificate within 3 business days. So just stay tuned for that.
Good. And if I can just add as well, thanks, Emily. Just real quick, if you guys have suggestions of things you want to learn about, especially about very young learners, I saw some in the chat box. Let us know, and we will try and get you as much information as we can through webinars or other sources, right? So just ask for what you're
Yeah,
looking for, and we'll do our best.
that's a great point. We plan to keep on pushing out more of these very young learner webinars and offering them. So let us know what you'd like to hear. Great, awesome. And I see some great suggestions coming in now. I'm going to direct everyone to the survey now. And thanks again, Andrew. I know it's late where you are, and thank you everyone for joining us. Just as a reminder, we'll have one more session of this webinar later on today, my time, and tomorrow, Andrew's time. All right, bye everyone. Thank you. Have a good day.